Father in heaven, as we come, we thank you for the opportunity we have to come and to learn about your grand plan, and just that you're wise, no doubt, and you have outsmarted your enemies, and yet you've allowed them to come to be in certain ways, and you've allowed all this in order to glorify yourself. So we ask for your wisdom this morning, and for us to continue to see the ways in which you humiliate your enemies in that regard. And we see the glory of the cross and all that Jesus accomplished. And so we just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so page 1 there, we've been going through, again, we're on session 14, so there's been a lot of background for sure. But one of the things that we are, we're trying to answer the question really at the top is, how do we answer biblically, why is the world the way it is? And so we're going to see some of that today. And we saw last time that during Jesus' day, that they basically had 3 answers to why we see the world being in its current situation. And one of that was these 3 rebellions. And we covered, for the most part, last time, Satan and his rebellion, which we don't know exactly when it was, or if it included other angels or other beings besides himself. We just know that he rebelled, and by the time we get to Genesis 3, he shows up as the shining one, and he takes the form of the serpent, and obviously causes Adam and Eve to rebel and to be kicked out of the garden. But what I want to talk a little bit about today, which we didn't get to last time, was some of the ramifications of that first rebellion. We have and then of Adam and Eve's rebellion, and then we'll get into Genesis 6, which is the next layer of rebellion, and again, we'll see how this all plays out. So, I've listed there the Genesis 3 passage, 15 through 19, and so just kind of going through this really quick. What do we have here? I don't think that the text is telling us that God has given this hostility between females and snakes. Okay? I don't think it's that hyper literal. That all women, even though my wife is one of them, if you put a snake in front of her, she probably would faint. Literally. She's that terrified. And over the years, it's gotten far worse, interestingly. So if we ever have a battle that's going on, a fun battle where she's picking on me, I just say, you know what? If you keep this up, I will put a snake in the shower. And she about faints and she almost vomits. It's amazing how much. But I don't think that's what God is saying here. I think what he's saying is that there's going to be this hostility, no doubt, between the satanic figure, the Satan figure, and the woman. And well, he says it here. I'll put enmity, he's talking to the snake, or to Satan here in Genesis 15. I would put hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. So now, what we have is these 2 seeds, these two offspring. Some versions say offspring, it's fine. The descendants. We're all descendants of Eve, no doubt. But what we see here is something a little broader in the sense of, I've given you some scripture there. We'll just go down to number 1. This long-standing hostility between Satan's offspring and the woman's seed is being used as the collective singular. The Bible is full of examples demonstrating that conflict between the children of the devil and the children of God. Is that insulting that we would call somebody, you're a child of the devil? It probably is insulting on its face, but is it true? We were all there once. So, and I've given you some verses. Ephesians 2 very clearly says that we were all by nature, our very nature, being born of Adam and Eve with the sin nature, we are children of the devil. 1 John 3 is very clear as well in saying, children of light versus children of dark, children of the devil versus children of God. So we don't need to shy away from this. Matthew 13:38, Jesus himself, if you want to make somebody guilty, let's just blame it on Jesus. It's okay. He can handle it. In that he describes that in this parable about seeds being planted, and he says, well, these are children of the evil one. So, and mainly the main thing is believer versus unbeliever. That's the two categories. There are no other categories. If you want to look in the sense of categories that are spiritual categories, again, in our culture right now, there's people want to throw out all these categories of race, right? And this group and that group. The only groups that you have in the Bible are believers and unbelievers. That's pretty much it. Because Galatians 3:28 says the same thing, right? We're all one in Christ. There's neither male, female, slave, free, bond, rich, poor. All those distinctions are eliminated in how to become a believer. There's not one way of salvation for the rich and another for the poor, or etc. There's no socioeconomic classes. If you're an unbeliever without Christ, you're in need. Those are the distinctions that you have. And that's the beauty of the gospel, right? Because when we come together in an ideal situation, rich, poor, all the different colors, we're all there. And when you see in Revelation 7 as an example, that you see all this host of people standing there, and what does it say? They're from every tribe, tongue, nation, group, all one in Christ. So that's the beauty. But there's going to be this conflict between unbelievers and believers. Do we see that? Especially when we see it as it relates to the world. The world is not our friend, for sure. John 8:44, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, you are of your father, the devil. He calls him, he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. So we see this perspective. Number 2 there, ultimately, you also have this being used as a singular in that God tells the serpent, hey, there's this hostility now between you and humanity. But one of her, this is important, one of her descendants, way down the line, he doesn't know when, is going to bruise you on the head, a striking blow, but you're going to bruise him. So this is what scholars will recognize as often being the first prophecy of Jesus, this prophecy of the gospel. And now in history, we look and we can see that certainly did Jesus get bruised? In what I put on here, number 3, the serpent figure would harm the woman's seed by bruising him on the heel, a temporary defeat, if you wanted to use that. Did Jesus get harmed on the cross? Yes. And we know that both, Luke 22, John 13, both tell us that Satan entered Judas. So, as we mentioned last week, Luke brought it up, that there's no doubt Satan was involved in the cross. And we'll see that as we get into the Gospels later, as it relates to all this. But they didn't know the full ramifications of what that would be. And so Satan entered Judas, betrays him, gets him to betray Jesus, and no doubt Jesus is bruised. But we also know that in the end, I've given you some verses here as well, that especially Romans 16:20, Hebrews 2, where God is going to crush Satan. And we know that Jesus on the cross defeated Satan and outsmarted him in some other things, Colossians 2:15. So, number 5 there, Adam and his descendants received the curse of death and also having to work hard to receive fruit from the earth. Eve and all her daughters will be cursed with pain and childbirth. So we see that. Number 7, after the flood, God makes this statement. I don't know, I did have it on here, but I removed it for space. Where God says, I will never again curse the earth. He's speaking that to Noah after Noah builds an altar and there's a sacrifice. But what I have here is this was not a total removal, because we know there are still thorns, thistles, and women. Where's Allie? If she was here, she'd tell you how much pain she had just 3 months ago. So a certain part of the curse was removed, whatever that means. We don't exactly know, but not all of it, because, again, if you go out to garden, you'll still see thorns and thistles. What also is important here is at the beginning of the rebellion of Adam and Eve, right? They were given the administration over the entire earth, and that would have been ours if they would have stayed true. But that's our goal. That's our destiny. But the physical creation, that's what we saw. Remember, the book of Genesis chapter 1 is about the physical heavens and the earth. It was said to be very good, as we saw last time, Genesis 1:31. But number 9, after Adam's sin, death and decay entered the entire universe. Entropy, if you want to use the fancy scientific or the laws of thermodynamics. Entered the entire universe, and humanity waits until the day of full redemption of humanity and a cursed world. So remember that as beautiful as the world is now, this is still cursed. This is a cursed world. That's why I feel just a hair, not much, of sympathy for secular or atheistic biologists or cosmologists or anybody looking at the world. When they look at the world, they look and go, this world's a horrible place in the sense that death exists, and that helps them in their framing their thinking of evolution, that death, remember, in evolutionary thinking, death is great because you need multiple generations in order to have mutations, in order to see advances, right? So for them, when things die and multiple generations happen, that is the pathway to greater, from their thinking, mutational benefits, right? Which we look in from a scientific perspective, from empirical evidence, we don't see any evidence of macroevolution from amoeba to man. It's completely missing in the record. Do we see microevolution? Yeah, we see adaptation, we see survival of the fittest, we see natural selection. That's all those things that God had instilled in the information, in the DNA. So I have no problem with microevolution, but there is absolutely no proof for macroevolution. That's why they talk about transitional forms or the missing link. They still talk about it. Well, they're still, what you'll often hear paleontologists say is that transitional forms are very rare. Well, think about it. In terms of a constant flow of evolutionary change, it should be constant. That there shouldn't be, they call it punctuated equilibrium, where you see these jumps, from, in the fossil record, you see jumps from this to supposedly that species, and you go, where's that in the middle? And they go, well, we don't see that. But it happened, because that's what the fossil record tells us. So anyways, all that to say is I feel bad for them, because when they look at the world, they're trying to come up with a mechanism to understand what they see. But what's missing for them is Genesis 1 and 2, which says, this isn't the way it started. That all we see now is a cursed world, and so we're trying to make sense of how it got here. But because we have Genesis 1 and 2, that gives us great hope to say, God says, it was very good. That's not how it started. Because, and then so, on the bottom there, Romans 5:12, just as through one man, sin entered the world, okay? Adam and Eve both, but he's blaming the man. Death came through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. It's interesting here that many scholars will say, well, this is how death entered the world. The wages of sin is death. And because man was given as a vice-regent over the creation, when death entered, his actions caused a curse to go upon all of creation. That's where we get into the laws of thermodynamics, especially the second law, which deals with entropy, which says things go from order to chaos. It's universal. There are no exceptions to this law. That's why it's called a law, right? What's the first law? The law of conservation, right? That mass is neither created nor destroyed. We have the same amount of mass. So when you get into those are things that we understand scientifically and empirically. We know that. But here is the context. If all we had was Romans 5:12, I might argue, say, well, the context is about Adam and humanity. So death spread to them. It didn't necessarily spread to the whole world. Okay? But the fact we have just a few chapters later, Romans 8, for the creation was subjected to futility, to a curse, not willingly, but because of him who subjected in hope, that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption. The world, the creation itself, is corrupted. How did that happen? Well, we know Genesis 1:31, there was no corruption. God said it was all very good. I'm putting this effort because last time I had Genesis 1, sorry. We had very good creation, operating beautifully. Somehow it became corrupted. Well, the only according to Romans 5, and this, the corruption came from Adam's sin as device region and the head, and it spread everywhere. So now we live in a cursed world. And the very creation itself is longing to be released from this slavery, and into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation groans and suffers. That's so weird. That the creation is, what we see as beautiful as it might be, is still not, it's accursed. I can't wait to see the new stuff. The uncursed version, so to speak. So anyways, okay, so let's go to page 2. So that kind of gives us an insight into when we look, and if you, we all have seen pictures of hurricanes that go through, tornadoes that go through. We see, the lion eating a little, baby gazelle, and we look and we see bloodshed and we see death, and we see that and we go, that doesn't seem right. And the reason, let's have some feedback. How do we know that the ways that we see the world is, that the lion eating the little gazelle, as an example, that is not the way it's always been for billions of years or millions of years, however, right? What makes us realize that, in fact, the way we see the world today is post-curse? How can we prove that? I'll give you one more.
That's a tough question.
Think of Old Testament. There's no doubt here.
Like the death was required to cover sin in the sacrificial system. So I think anything that dies, according to the Bible, it said blood was required to cover it. And so the curse of sin, something needs to pay for it.
For sure.
So.
Oh, what else? Isaiah 11. Look, just as scan through that, you'll see what I'm going for.
Adam and Eve walked through it all the ends before the sink. So they weren't eating him.
They were vegetarians. Genesis 1, very clear, says, I've given you all the green plants for food. So we know there was no death there. There was no barbecue prior to that. Okay. So when we think about, draw here. Okay, we're going to go eternity as we've been doing, right? And then we're going to go 1 and 2 here, and then 3 on is cursed world. Okay, so let's go all the way down. Let's go here, and we're going to put eternity over here. Let's do that. And this is going to be the 1,000-year reign. Okay, what's going on during this time? We know that Jesus is here, right? Jesus has come to redeem us. We have new glorified bodies. The curse has been lifted because the curse over the earth has been lifted. What's going on in this period? What do we know? Did you find it?
Yep.
Go ahead, read it.
Well, I think you're talking Isaiah 11:6. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them, and a cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like ox.
See, we know that in God's uncursed world, which Jesus is going to live, the lion is eating straw. He's not eating blood. This confirms for me that God is going to return us back to this uncursed world, if we go like that over to here, that we don't have millions of years of animals eating other animals and with death and destruction. Why? Because God undoes it here. This is the way it should be. This is the way that it was back here when there was no death. So what this helps me to say is Isaiah 11. This is talking about this coming time in the future when all these things are lifted and we go back. And what it does is this helps us to understand that the way that the world is thinking, again, I fault them only a little bit because sometimes there's some dishonesty there in the sense of, that's why as a Christian, for me personally, I have to be so anti-evolution. Not only because of the science, again, empirically speaking, but because Scripture tells me that is not the way it was. It started off good. Question?
Are we all vegetarians during millennium?
That's a great question.
Yeah, barbecue.
So
disappointing, doesn't it?
Got good barbecue too.
I don't. The Bible does not tell us what it's going to be like here, as it relates to us eating.
How, and I just have the questions because I was just looking at it. I think it's in Ezekiel, but the temple. But they said that there'll be sacrifices continually.
There will still be death.
And so that's interesting.
It's interesting here if you look at Ezekiel 40 through 48, and you can look at Zechariah, I believe it's 14. You see a couple things. You see sacrifices happening there. But that's intentional in order to look back towards the cross. Just like if you look here, from, let's say, Exodus 20 on to the period of the law, you had all these sacrifices here. What were they doing? Well, they were looking forward to the cross, right? So all these sacrifices didn't provide forgiveness of sin. They looked forward to the cross, which does. These ones, for some reason, God institutes in Zechariah 14 the Feast of Tabernacles as well. That's the only feast that we see come back, so to speak. In fact, he says there that the nations, if they don't celebrate it, God's going to send no rain on them. So he plays hardball, right? Jesus rules with a rod of iron. But during Ezekiel, it talks about this huge temple that's going to be built in Jerusalem, and the complex is 1 mile in square. It's pretty amazing. But they're going to have sacrifices, and well, doesn't that take away from the cross? Well, not necessarily. It points back and reminds the Jewish people of the cross. Not that they provide any sort of efficacy or fruit. So that's barbecue, because they certainly, and we know what barbecue smells like. It smells a sweet smelling aroma. So, but nevertheless, when we look at this time frame, if I was to shade it all between Genesis 3 to here, this is the cursed world that we're in. And so when we look around and we see all these natural disasters or mutations and diseases, everything else, we tell people, hey, Genesis 3, stinking Adam and Eve. They put God's world into a cursed situation. That's one of the reasons why we have a lot of trouble today. That's one of the reasons why things are so confusing when you look at, I think I love astronomy, and I think about the way that things decay, all things decay, the speed of light, all these things that provide a certain level of confusion. Well, how do we know, is the Earth young or is it old? What about starlight? There's billions of years of distance, and, speed of light at our current rate is 180,000 miles a second. That would take, a billion years to get here. But what we recognize now is even the speed of light is slowing down and decaying, which if you extrapolate backwards, it helps us to go, oh, well, those ages aren't as long as they should be because what's the assumption? The speed of light is the same today as it always has been. But even science now is showing that that's not to be true.
Just make one comment. So this whole thing, I mean, it sounds very intellectual, but on the daily, I just had a conversation with one of my clients this week, and what came out, he's suffering tremendously from physical, mental health, physical health, relational health, and he's just it just seems so unfair. And yet he holds on to the evolutionary principle of belief system. And he's just why should I even care? And
That's a great logical conclusion.
And he's very logical. And so anyway, if you think of him, just pray for him that the Holy Spirit get hold of him and shows him this. But it's hopeless.
It is.
And then but you know inside of you that it's not, and that you're trying to make peace with it, but it doesn't matter if I die, because I'm just evolved.
I'm a slime, a glorified slime. Yeah.
He knows it matters.
And see, that's the thing is, there's something in us because we're made in the image of God. We have a conscience and we long for something. We recognize something. We have that moral imprint. But when you look at this, if this is your frame of reference, this is it, And even looking empirically, right? What does empirical mean? Just observable, repeatable, right? That's all the scientific method is founded on looking at things, making an hypothesis, making observations, testing it, and it's repeatable, okay? But it is based on an assumption. Go ahead.
On on the other side, kind of the backside of what she's saying, they found now, though, in business, though, if you can build a business where your sources don't have to be contaminated, your people that are working under you can be blessed, the people using the product can be blessed, and everything can be, let's say, win all the way around. And it seems like if you do things, still God blesses the way he's told you to, let's say, be righteous to other people and treat them with
this moral law that is existent in the conscience has fruit. But this guy, if all he's doing is looking out with what we would call, theologians call general revelation, right? What's general revelation?
What Romans 1 talks
General.
Yeah, so it's general means it's available to everybody. Everybody can look at the stars at night. We went and got up yesterday and looked at the comet. It was pretty awesome. And we look at that and we go, well, yeah, it's beautiful, but I see death. I'm glorified slime. What purpose do I have? Can I have a purpose? If I'm just glorified slime molecules and my emotions, my feelings of what might be right or wrong is just a substance of my chemicals, the sum total of my chemicals, I can't have it. But special revelation, the Bible, tells us, no, it wasn't always that way. This is a defective situation. It was very good. Bob?
Well, there is, I think, a large portion of the evolutionary scientists that worship the creation. I mean, they get general revelation, and they're awestruck with it. And there's many quotes of them. They want to credit intellectual divinity to something, and they assign it to the universe in a very illogical way. It's true. They're really backed up against the wall. They have to give glory to something. And you do see them worshiping the creation, which we see in Romans also. So there is another spectrum where basically they're awestruck with it too.
It's interesting because the latest article in Astronomy Magazine was reading, they were talking about dark matter and dark energy, and I won't get into all that, but except to say that 95%, when they look at a galaxy, I'll say it this way, when they look at these huge galaxies, they go, there's no way that thing would hold together, so we don't have any proof of it, but there has to be dark matter or dark energy from a massive, massive scale to hold these massive galaxies together. So they have no proof of it, but they recognize there's something happening here. So they make a logical connection, cause and effect, right? This is rules. These are laws, contradiction and cause and effect. Something is causing that thing to be held together. So they extrapolate and hypothesize that it's dark energy. We don't have any proof that one day maybe we will. And I think some of them, some of the others who are a little bit more honest will say, we don't see empirically macroevolution, slime to man. We don't see it. Transitional forms, fossil record, empty, absent. Some will say, there has to be an intelligence.
right.
The whole design movement. They look at the digital nature of DNA. The information, man, that information had to come from somewhere. It can't mutate. Information doesn't do that. So they're willing to say, well, there has to be an intelligent designer. We know that's not God. We don't want to be spiritual. But we recognize that logically there's something there. And in the same way, these astronomers do it. But the source for them, see, they're willing to do it there, but they can't make the philosophical, intellectual jump to say, could it be something that we can't put in a box empirically?
Well, going back to the dark matter that they assumes out there, the holding things together. Who holds everything together?
Well, we know that.
But it's interesting. It is that Jesus claims to be holding everything together. There he is. I'm possible they're making this conclusion, yet Jesus completes the hypothesis.
Well, Colossians says that very thing. Jesus is the one the whole team there. What I don't want to assume is that instead of there being some force, he's the force. Is there some sort of physical force that's holding that together like dark matter that we just don't have the technology to observe. Possibly. Even me, who would love to see the answer is Jesus, I would still be a little hesitant.
Hey, Mr. Literal, it's got to be Jesus. Go on, get you. It could be.
But man is without excuse, though.
He's without excuse.
That's the key
Yeah.
thing.
And
They
know in their hearts, but they suppress the truth. They push it down. I mean, think like a beach ball in the water, right? What does it take to keep it underwater? What if you just say, I'm gonna be agnostic. I'm gonna just put my hands to myself. Think the truth of God and his creation is gonna shoot out of the water. But we have to actively push that truth down. And that's what Paul says the unbelievers do. Okay.
Good. And
So what's that?
it's a good analogy. Thank you.
I didn't make it up. I'm Greg Fawn. Nothing's original with me.
What's that?
Greg Bonson made that up.
That's good. I don't even know who that is really, but
Someone he made up.
so all right. So now we have this second heavenly rebellion, and so what we have is I'm going to put a line here. This is going to be Genesis 6. So again, the question is, how did the world get as bad as it is? Well, we know that the curse, when Adam and Eve sinned, a curse came into the world. The creation is groaning. The second thing that's often missed is, God or Moses is writing Genesis 3. Well, we know what happens in Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, right? Well, that's bad. Well, then after Abel is killed, Adam and Eve have another son. His name is Seth. And then we begin to see a genealogy taking place that Seth's kids. And then when you get to Genesis 5, again, all this is really, really tight. In Genesis 5, Moses gives a genealogy of 10 generations from Adam all the way to Noah. And then in chapter 6, we start talking about the flood. So during this period, between Genesis, I'll put Genesis 3 here, you have, depending on whether you're reading the Hebrew version or you're reading the Septuagint version, which is the Greek Old Testament, you either have 1,656 years or 2,256 years between Genesis, the beginning of creation here to the time of the flood, actually. So a couple thousand years. All I know is that's a long time. I mean, that's a long time. And so what's going on during this time? Well, here we have in Genesis 6, verse 1, Moses is beginning to write something down. Now, let me step back a second again. Remember, super important. I'm going to put here Deuteronomy, all right? Deuteronomy, just the whole book. So, Moses is writing the book of Deuteronomy and the first 5 books, the Torah, roughly 1400 and let's say 1406 BC. Okay. We said before that the creation took place roughly 5500 BC, okay? Depending on, that's a whole complicated thing. Just go with me on that. So, the flood happens, do some math. Let's say the flood happens at, what is that? Let's just say 3800 BC to average it out, okay? So now, 1400, 38 minus 1400 was what? Another 2400 years? Is that right? Yep. So now we have from the flood over to this point is 2400 years, all right? Of human history that's taking place from Genesis 9 after Noah and all the boys in the family came off the boat, spread out. So we know that the Israelites went into Egypt. They stayed there. Roughly they went in, let's say, 1800 BC, okay? So there a little bit of time. There's a lot, what I'm saying is there's a lot of human history that has taken place. So when Moses comes and he's writing to this group of people that have come out, what we know is that their mind is not empty. As I said in the article, if you read it,
When did you send it?
I sent it last week. So I always send things from the Tahoe Community Church because it's just easier. It has everything there. But in that article, I talked about the historical, the literary, and the theological context of Genesis 6. And one of the things that I mentioned there was that their minds was filled with Egyptian thinking, with Mesopotamian thinking, with Canaanite thinking. You know, just like us, we're shaped. You know, we are also shaped by social media and other things that influence us. Sometimes we go, oh, well, what do you think about this? And we whip out something and we go, well, where'd you get that from? And you go, I don't really know. Like the beach ball. I don't know where I got that. I got it somewhere. It wasn't originated from me, but I got it and it's there in my mind and it works. Okay.
You had supplemental books. I've been reading a little bit of the Book of Jubilees and Enoch and so forth. It seems it's very fascinating. That
we're gonna get
this chapter. You are.
Yeah. It's okay. Hold your thought, because we're gonna see something in the same way. So when Moses now is writing, he's writing to these Israelites who have all this information there. What do they know? Well, all of those cultures, every culture in the world has a flood story in it. Okay. Every culture in the world has some sort of understanding of these gods coming down and being with women, right? The Greek demigods, right? What's the thing? What's your favorite series?
Oh, Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson. And so, who's the writer? Riordan. Rick Riordan. He writes these stories to a teenage audience, right? Basically. Very successful, but he's bringing in all the Greek and the Roman and the Egyptian mythology of these demigods and gods coming down and these fights, and it's very fun to read. But it doesn't come from a vacuum. So what we said last time, super important, is here we have Genesis 6 written, okay? Here we have history, Genesis 6 history. What came first, the history or the written? The history. Okay. So all this history now of these potential, which we're going to see, of the flood and divinities mixing with humanity and creating all these craziness, it has been existing for 2,400 years. And now when Moses comes, he comes to say, okay, guys, I know you've heard this, but I'm going to give you the real story. Okay, you've heard a lot of things, but I'm going to give you the real version of how this came to be. And that is when we get to Genesis 6. So let's jump in there at the top. When humankind began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humankind were beautiful. Thus they took wives or women for themselves from any that they chose. So the Lord said, my spirit will not remain in humankind indefinitely, since they are mortal. They will remain for 120 more years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after this, when the sons of God were having sexual relations with the daughters of humankind, who gave birth to them, their children. They were the mighty heroes of old, the famous men or ones of reputation. So, what you have now is, okay, I'm going to make this not to scale, right? So here's the flood, and 120 years. So what has been happening for, we don't know how long, let's just say 500 years, okay? Because if the flood is at 2256 after the curse, then let's just throw in a number, 500 years could be 1,000. What you have, Moses is saying, hey, during this period, mankind began to multiply. And we know that at that time, according to Genesis 5, who's the oldest guy in the Bible? Methuselah. How long? 969, right? How long was Adam? 930. You have all these different long periods. I think that's very little. I got no problem with that. Because there's a whole bunch of things going on during this time. And what you see, it would be really odd to have it be literal or not literal. And then later, after the flood, all their ages start going down. You go, well, what? Well, now what does that mean? If it was spiritual there, then all of a sudden Abraham dies at 175. How do we spiritualize that? It's just so inconsistent to me. But there's something going on prior to the flood that helped them live longer, blah, blah, blah. Plus their genetics. If you ever want to read a good book, there's a book called Genetic Entropy. And it talks about the mutations of mankind and the generations that have taken place, just from even a secular perspective, and how our current generation is only a few generations removed from the end. when our bodies will be so filled with mutations that we won't even be able, it will be so disease ridden. And he just highlights and goes, let's do some calculations of what we see not only in the empirical world as it relates to human genetics and DNA and stuff. I have a copy if you want to read it. It's pretty amazing. And what it tells us, it's pretty depressing actually in one regard, because you look around and you go, what is happening? Even, you know, with all the allergies and stuff, is it GMO or is it genetics? And when I grew up, I never even heard of a peanut allergy ever. And now we ask questions on every BBS thing. Yeah, allergies, and there's all kinds of them. So anyways, all that being said, what you have is a whole bunch of growth going on, population becoming, but so what I did here is, who are these sons of God? So I'm just going to right over here. You have this contrast between the sons of God, we'll talk about them, and humanity, daughters, okay? Daughters of humans is really what it says. And you think, well, that's a little odd. It's making a contrast between daughters of Adam, or humanity, and these other guys, okay?
In I don't know if I'm getting ahead of, but in the Jubilees, they say it was the Watchers, a king, were down by the instruction of God to teach the humans.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Trust me. Go all the way to your last page.
But see, right there, it was.
I
thought that was the end.
was building up. You're taking away the climax. You go to the last page, it should say identity of the son of the dot. It's just a little chart. I did not make this chart, but I got it from one of my books. I don't want to spend too much time here except to say that I want to be honest, that this idea that the sons of God are angels is a very minority view in the Christian world. And really, as you saw, hopefully if you read the article I sent, I gave some history of that. It changed around. The earliest would be the 3rd century, and then really St. Augustine in the 4th century, roughly 400 AD, he got a hold of this and he said, oh, these sons of God, those are Seth's kids. They're humans mating with, basically what he did is he said that you have Seth's kids, and he said those are believers mating with unbelievers. Now, if I was a woman, I would be very offended. Because what about the wicked man? It's only daughters are wicked? Of course, yeah. Well, I said I'd be offended. Jerry just added to it. You have this idea of supposedly that Seth's kids were the good guys, the godly men, and they got trapped by these beautiful human women. What do you think? And even if that's the case, when believers and unbelievers get together and have kids, do they create giants or automatic men of renown, or, no? So what I've given you here is 4 different views, okay? You can look at these, you can see the evidence and the problems. The theological distinction, the godly line of Seth, is probably the most adhered to belief of what Genesis 6 means. I just show that to say look at it because honestly, I'm not even going to legitimize any other view because I think you're all ridiculous. So you can disagree, that's fine. So let's go back to page 2. I just put that out there to say it's there if you want to look at it, do your own research, but historically speaking, and I said this in the article, and in the article I had given some, this view there, the Seth view, I gave the answers against it, so I did it there, so I didn't have to do it here. But also there was several good articles that have come out that show in ancient interpretation, the idea that these were angels is almost 100% unanimous from all of ancient history up till about, again, the 3rd century. So sometime after that, it changed. But in Jesus' day, in Peter's day, they believed absolutely that these sons of God were angels. And we'll see that when we get to the New Testament. I think the New Testament just slam dunks it. And anybody that doesn't want to accept it, well, whatever. I said there in number 3, this ancient belief up to 70 AD were that the fallen Elohim were those that came down in heaven. Now, Elohim, Sir Emily, I know the other girls were here. What's Elohim?
Isn't that in the urgent being?
Yes. Elohim is a Hebrew word that just means spiritual being. So when we talk, you learned a Hebrew word today. Okay? So when you see Elohim on here, what we're saying is that angels are Elohim, Michael's an Elohim, they're just spiritual beings. So we're saying that because of the foundation that we laid before that. Number 4, clearly, okay. Number 5, these fallen Elohim, these sons of God, repeatedly took certain women and impregnated. What the imperfect verb there is saying that during this period of time, we don't know how long, but during this time before the flood happened, however many years we put it, that these sons of God were coming down, and it wasn't just a one-time event. It was continually happening. Okay? How long, we don't know. There's so much missing here. And it's fascinating to me that as Moses is writing to this generation, he doesn't feel the need to explain anything. When he talks about the sons of God coming down and seeing beautiful human women, they're like, oh yeah, we know about that. They weren't thinking, oh, this must be the godly line of Seth. How do we know Seth's line was godly? As a man that has kids, are all my kids guaranteed to be saved just because I'm saved? We know that's not true. We know that's not true experientially as well as scripturally. So to force things on the text to say all of a sudden all of Seth's kids, that entire genealogy of Genesis 5 from Seth all the way down to Noah, they're all 100% saved, but they saw these wicked human women, which most likely were daughters of Cain. It doesn't say they were daughters of Cain. You don't have this Seth-Cain distinction at all. And it doesn't even highlight Seth. Genesis, it talks about Seth because he was the one that in chapter 4 after Cain. But in Genesis 5:1, it says, this is the generations of Adam. It doesn't specify Seth only. Why pick Seth out? Why not Enoch? Maybe it was Enoch's kids that were the godly ones and these other wicked daughters were somebody else. It doesn't say that. It's forcing something on the text. If we just read it naturally, we come and we go, okay, well, who are these sons of God? That's kind of odd. But this phrase there, I put it up in the top, the B'nai Elohim, B'nai Ha-Elohim. Let's look down at the bottom. Or right there, sons of God. This phrase, very specific Hebrew phrase, I have there Job 1:6-1. All scholars, 100%, will say, oh yeah, well, when that phrase appears in Job 1:6-1 and 38:7, it's referring to angels. And you go, oh. So from a linguistic perspective, it refers to angels. Well, yeah, we know it refers to angels there. And then when it appears in these other ones, which is a very similar phrase, the B'nai Elohim, I've given you there Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 29, oh, you heavenly beings. So there, it's not the sons of Seth. These aren't humans. So it's interesting the gymnastics that people have to do in order to avoid reading what is straightforward. Mm-hmm. So these sons of God came down and saw these human women. That contrast is very clear. All right. So let's see here. I don't know. See how far we want to go. In verse 4 at the top, you're going to see this. You're going to see these phrases here. One of the things that I mentioned in the article as well was that you have these characters. You have really 3 characters here. You have the sons of God. You have the daughters, all right, of man, of humans. And then you have these Nephilim.
Verse 4?
Yes, verse 4 of Genesis 6. I'm back on page 2. Yep, at the top, right? Page 2 at the top. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also after this. So Moses is writing to them and he goes, hey guys, These Nephilim were on the earth in those days, before the flood, and also afterwards. Now, he's talking to the generation that 40 years prior, what happened? This is at the end, so when he's writing this, he's probably writing it during the 40 years. But what happened at the beginning before they wandered in the wilderness 40 years?
Bondage.
What happened? They got out of Egypt. What caused the 40-year wandering?
Because they didn't realize the stories of the Nephilim when they spent spies into the promised land.
They saw giants.
And they
So
saw giants.
the Nephilim appears in Genesis 6:4, and it appears in 13:33. Numbers. That's the only two places in the entire Bible that specific word appears. Well, it's interesting that Numbers 13, they send the 12 spies out to the land. They're there 40 days. They come back. Caleb says, "We got this." The other 10, and Joshua, the other 10 say, "We saw the Nephilim in the land," who are the descendants of Anak, right?
Right.
Or the Anak, the descendants of the Nephilim. They're big. They're large.
We're like grasshoppers.
Yeah, we're like grasshoppers. I think that's a little bit of hyperbole, but I think it's probably a little bit literal too, in the sense that they're of great size and great stature. And Caleb says it doesn't matter. If God could destroy Egypt, he's got this. The other 10 say nope, and they threaten to stone Moses and all of them because now God has brought them out there, and they say, "Let's get a new leader. Let's go back to Egypt." God's ticked. God says, "Okay, you know what? For every day you went to spy out the land, you didn't trust me, I'm going to give you 1 year of wandering. Therefore, all of you that are 20 and older who didn't believe, you're going to die. Your corpses will rot in the wilderness. It's going to be your kids that go in that you said that would be killed." Okay? So, they've already seen the Nephilim. We already have their testimony. So now Moses is writing, and so whenever, again, they're wandering, he writes it somewhere in there, and he says, "Hey, by the way, the Nephilim, which you just saw, were in the earth in those days, and also we know afterwards because you just saw." So these Nephilim are not the angels. The Nephilim are the children of these angels that come down and mated with women and produce these hybrid, half angel, half women. These demigods, right? I mean, to follow the stories. In the story of Percy Jackson, was he normal like every other kid? No, he had supernatural powers. He wasn't like a god, but he was somewhere in the middle that he was, look at this. He was probably, look at the end of Genesis 6:4. We can just put this right in the book of Percy Jackson. Okay? He was a mighty hero. He was famous. He was a person of reputation. Would that be fair to say? Yeah. So what you have is these demigods, and what Moses is telling them is, you guys have heard about all their exploits. The Nephilim that you are now scared of now, they had a lot of exploits back before the flood, and now the whole land is filled with them. And we're going to see why. So the question is, let's see, number 6, these hybrid offspring became famous for their supernatural exploits. It makes good fiction today. The Nephilim are not the sons of God. They are the children of the sons of God and human women. So, trying to think of how and opus. I want you to think about for a moment, what is Satan's goal here? Okay, let's put some chronology. If you read my article, you got an advantage. Okay, but for those of you that didn't, you're gonna have to think outside the box. Okay, so we have Genesis 6, we have Genesis 11, which is the Tower of Babel. We'll get there next time. Genesis 12. What's so magical about Genesis 12?
Abraham.
Okay, so we'll get that in a minute. God says to Abraham, walk throughout the land. This whole land, I'm going to give it to you and your descendants. So if you're Satan, what are you thinking? Well, I got to try to disrupt that. Okay? What's that?
Take possession of the land.
Yes. So what's the other promise we said, I believe it's in Genesis 15. So we have 12, we have 15, and we have 17, which are the three main promises that God gives to Abraham. In Genesis 15, he tells Abraham, hey, by the way, how long is it going to be before they come back? Remember? He says it's going to be 400 years before they inherit the land, because they're going to go out and they're going to go to Egypt. So now you have this 400-year gap. So that's Genesis 12. God makes a promise to Abraham. Hey, by the way, I'm going to give this to your land and your descendants. And they hang out there for, if you look total, about 200 years. Because Jacob lived a long time, Isaac lived a long time. And so by the time Abraham was 75, he died at 175. He was still in land. That's 100 years. And then if you go a little bit more, it's about 200 years that they hung out. And then they left. Okay? So you have this like 200-year gap between when they left, at least. It's really 230. But between the time they came back the first time. It's interesting to me that if we go to Genesis 14, Moses is writing to these guys up here. He goes, oh, by the way, you guys know about the story of when Lot was taken, remember? And he was captured, and Abraham there go chase him down with his 318 servants. It says that the Rephaim were in the land. Where'd those guys come from? The Rephaim is another tribe of Nephilim. You can I won't bore you with all the details. So Moses is saying, oh, by the way, you guys over here, I'm telling you much later, but when our father Abraham was over there, he went out and there was a battle that took place, and the Rephaim were in there. We're going, wow, they came back fast. Right? I mean, not too long after God had made the promise to Abraham, all of a sudden, boom, the Rephaim are in the land. So then by the time that these guys come back in Numbers 13, several centuries later, the land is filled with these Rephaim and Nephilim. In fact, what you have in Genesis 15 is God says, I'm going to give you all this land, and when you come back, you're going to have to take care of it. I mean, there are going to be all these Perizzites, Hizzites, all these tribes. So when they come back, God says to Moses and to Joshua, there's certain tribes, there's these 7 tribes I want you to annihilate. Don't leave anything breathing. But there was only 7. And later, what you see in Joshua 11 as an example. Yeah, this was in the article too. So, is basically when they went in later, 40 years later to conquer, the writer says, oh, by the way, we took care of all the Nephilim that were here. Except there were a few that fled. And they fled over to the city, like the coastal cities, like Gath, which is where I did my archaeology, where Goliath is from. Oh, how coincidental is that? That Gath and the sons of Anak, the 4 brothers, were all from the coastal cities. Well, it's no surprise because we'll see that later. When they go, one of the ways of success was how well they got rid of the Nephilim and God's. So you see, what you see is Satan somehow, I don't know if Satan said, hey, I got an idea, and he went and recruited the sons of God. We don't know. All we know is the sons of God came down prior to the flood in order to interrupt God's plan. Now, and then they came afterwards. So let's do pre-flood for a moment. Why would God, or why would Satan encourage, if anything, the angels to come down and to mate with human women and produce these Nephilim? What would be, let's just speculate. I'm saying I don't know. Let's just speculate. What would be some good reasons?
I think he gave us a hint with the serpent bruising the deal at the head, because if he can infiltrate that, then her seed isn't.
Her seed's corrupted. If he could contaminate all of humanity, then there will be no pure seed for the Messiah to come forth and to take him out. So you can see that's a very good motive. Plus, I think he just likes destruction. He likes trouble. And we'll see later all of the destruction and havoc that these men of reputation, these were like, oh, these guys are famous, they're actors, these guys were famous for their destruction, cannibalism. We'll see that later in the book of Enoch and Jubilees and other writings. But all Moses gives us is really one verse, maybe two. Genesis 6:2 and 6:4.
And you do see that even today, it plays out in marriages where you're not equally yoked. And the result of that, so Quint and I have been married, we're second time around. Our first marriages, we were unequally yoked, and our children did not benefit from that.
Isn't it true?
Yeah.
Yeah, my whole dad's side, because of that. I'm like the first one who's been saved since my grandma.
Nothing's impossible with God, but it is difficult. It creates a lot of challenges, and that's why God is so serious about always, even in the Old Testament, is that a lot of people make claims that the Bible is, and certain people have abused it to say that God is against interracial marriage. You even look at some of these evangelical places like Bob Jones University, even 20 years ago, they forbid interracial dating. You go, what Bible are you reading? This is not found in the Bible. The Bible has always been against believers and unbelievers. Even in the Old Testament. Remember, that's the distinction. There are no racial distinctions. There's no social distinctions as it relates that in the Bible, a poor woman can't marry a rich guy, or whatever, economic. We don't have a caste system like India. But you always have, don't you dare marry the foreign women, because it wasn't a racial thing. Why? Why did God instruct them?
Bringing in the foreign gods.
You're bringing in the foreign gods. They're going to corrupt your heart. And we see that happen. Solomon, right? Through all his political arrangements. The Bible is so consistent, 100% against believer and unbeliever, because it creates so much trouble.
It's interesting though. I was just reading Nehemiah, and when he said divorce, when they came back and they married all the people with it knowing that there is possibly corrupted bloodline in that area, if they didn't totally extinguish it, that gives it a different layer of intrigue. It does. Of why they said you need to divorce and send your children away.
It was amazing that
It was really hard.
we don't have God's endorsement necessarily of that, but there's no doubt that these guys said, go divorce your Lord.
That's why they shunned the Samaritans, right?
From a religious perspective, not an ethnic thing, but even though they became very ethnocentric,
But that was why they became. Samaritans were intermingled, were they?
for sure.
So when they were carried away, and under oppression, and God instructed them to marry and live there and be
In Babylon.
in that one. Sorry, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
He was referring to Mary.
Within their own
Okay.
religion. Because again, we know that Ruth, she's a foreigner. She's an illegal alien, right? Okay. She came in and because what did she say? What did she say to Naomi?
My God is yes.
Your God's going to be my God, and your people will be my people. And the most important thing is God adopted her in because she didn't worship Molech anymore. Bob?
Like this week, I had some Israelis in wearing yarmulkes and the whole 9 yards. And I said Mazel Tov to them, and they got all excited. We're asking whether
Hebrew.
they all got excited. They asked where the kosher deli was. Nice, and but what I enjoyed doing in talking to Jewish people is talk about the sanctification that the dietary law creates. And I also said that
The separation, right?
yeah, because it causes, it's difficult, and the way I say it is, it's simple to party with a Jew. I mean, if I invited the Jews over from, the neighborhood, your wife would go, what do I cook? Tell them to go away. I can't figure this out. So there's a point where the sanctification plan with the food. What's interesting is they just boasted in how great the dietary law was. Of course. And I said, no, in Deuteronomy, it talks about the purpose being sanctifying you. Then the marvelous thing of having a homeland 2,000 years later, that they were able to identify who they were. They didn't assimilate because of God's plan for sanctification. And it really is a miraculous thing. And trying to get them to marvel at the different reason for the dietary laws. It's not moral per se.
It's providing them righteousness, but there's a sanctification or a separation aspect.
And it's miraculous, the 2,000 years. And it's trying to get them to marvel at that, and they still just didn't get it. They started, they didn't get how great it is. Yeah, they didn't get that. I said, I believe that's not following the Jewish carpenter, buddy. Let's see if you understand that.
Who set me free? Any final comments? Because I just want to introduce this next section for you. What we're going to see now. So this is the kind of the Old Testament perspective, Genesis 6, 1 through 4. There's not a lot here, but what helps us is we're going to fast forward now to this Second Temple period background at the end of page 2 there, Modern. I'm glad that we can learn new words, right? So on the bottom there, we have Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, and the sectarian writings, which are like the Dead Sea Scrolls stuff. The Dead Sea Scrolls are awesome because it gives us this window into all these writings that were kind of heard of, but they're like, where'd these things come from? How do we know they're true? Well, then when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, a lot of these writings and many, many more were like, whoa, man, Judaism was pretty diverse because before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, you had pretty much one. You kind of had one strain of understanding, like what you were describing, Bob, of these guys. So you have in the first century, you have the Essenes, which were well known. You had the Pharisees. Okay, we know about them from the New Testament. We have the Sadducees. Okay, we have the Zealots. So you have kind of all these groups, and you have a whole bunch of other groups that we're here. In 70 AD, all these guys got wiped out. And the only ones that made it through 70 AD, which was the destruction of the temple, were the Pharisees, which developed into rabbinic Judaism, the Talmud, etc. So for 2,000 years, this is what people thought the religion of Jesus, in that day, like, oh, this was the strongest one. Well, once the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, they found, oh man, all these guys, they had a lot of viewpoints that were out there. It's very diverse. So the assumption that people had once an archaeological discovery was made, provided all this extra information that we saw in the New Testament, was kind of dismissed. It's not rabbinic Judaism, which came from the Pharisees, was
One of just many viewpoints from the Dead Sea Scrolls was the books of, the ones that you're talking, Jubilees.
Oh, yeah.
There, too.
Jubilees, the book of Enoch, a whole bunch of other things. The book of Giants. So what we're going to do, the reason why we're doing this is because just like Moses was writing to the group that had all this thinking, we want to get into the mind of Peter and Jude and Paul, all these guys that have all this thinking. So what I did here is we'll just cover this first part. Let's see. This is, okay. So if you look here, we're going to get into the New Testament next time. But right there on the top of page 3, I've given you some passages from Jubilees, from 3rd Maccabees, from the Book of Wisdom. And if you look at these were writings that were, who we don't know who wrote. Okay? I have no idea. But what we do know is that Peter and Jude knew about them. Well, how do we know that? Because we'll see on the bottom there, page 3, next time, Jude quotes them. I could just a couple examples, 3 examples on the bottom there, of how Jude quotes them, Peter quotes them, Paul quotes them, and you go, where is he getting this stuff? In my library, I have this book, it's like this fat, and it's a commentary on the New Testament, and it's every verse or every book, and what it does is it highlights. The commentary is entitled "The New Testament Use of the Old Testament Commentary." So when you're looking at it, if there's a connection or an allusion or a reference made to some Old Testament passage, the writer, the commentator will say, "Hey, what he's really referring to is, when Matthew says in Matthew 2 that Jesus, the virgin, this is a reference to Isaiah 7, okay? But what it also does in one of the sections is, what was the context in Judaism at the time? And it's a gold mine of, oh, really? Well, this is a reference to the book of Maccabees. This is a reference to Jubilees here. This is a reference to this other Testament of Abraham, the Testament of Adam and Eve. There's hundreds of books of the pseudepigrapha and the apocrypha. And what it does is it makes these connections to say, when they're saying these things, the astute reader will go, oh, I see where he's getting that from. And so, Jubilees here, all the way down. We'll wrap it up here. Just Jubilees, the 415, the top one. She bare him, I'm going on the second line. She bare him a son in the 3rd week in the 6th year, and he called his name Jared. For in his days, the angels of the Lord descended on the earth, those who are named the Watchers. So now we have 3 names. We have angels, we have Watchers, and from the book of Genesis, we have the sons of God. That they should instruct the children of men. So the name Jared means to come down. Yarad, it's just a verb in Hebrew. It means to come down. That's where the Jordan River gets its name, because what does the Jordan River do? It flows down out of the mountains. Okay? Jubilees 4, Enoch testified to the Watchers who had sinned with the daughters of men. Okay? 3rd Maccabees 2, you destroyed those from the past, worked iniquity among those who were also giants, who trusted in their might, bringing down upon them the water immeasurable. I made reference to that because the giants, these hot Nephilim, they're connected with the flood. They all got flooded and drowned, okay, at least before. Wisdom 14, for even in the beginning, when the arrogant giants were perishing, the hope of the world fled for a refuge on a raft or a boat. Well, that's the flood. And then Jubilee 7, let's go on 21, we'll wrap it up. For owing to these 3 things came the flood upon the earth. It's interesting here that according to this writer, why did the flood come? Well, namely owing to the fornication, okay, that's sexual, where the Watchers against the law of their ordinance went whoring after the daughters of men and took themselves wives of all of which they chose, and they made the beginning of uncleanness. So, when we get to the New Testament writings, 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude, that's inspired scripture. This isn't scripture. But when we see them write, we're going to go, all it says is, well, the angels that sinned. And you go, well, which angels sinned? Peter, what are you talking about? Jude, what are you talking about? Which angels that sinned? Well, we're going to go through it phrase by phrase, and we'll see the connection that clearly, 100%, Peter and Jude are reading this material because they reference it. And they get descriptions of the judgments. And you go, well, that's not in Genesis. Did Genesis 6 provide us any note of judgment? It just says angels came down, made with women, Nephilim were these mighty guys. And then the next verse says, and human was wicked. And then, no, I want you to build a boat. From now on, you have 120 years to get it done. No mention of judgment, no mention of holding these guys accountable. But Peter and Jude both make reference to some angels that sin, and it's our job to chase it down and figure out which ones, and we'll see that. So, all right, well, let's pray, and we'll get to the rest of these next time, which will be, I think, kind of fun to see how it all gets together. All right. Father, we do thank you that you've given us so much to think about, and here we are again. We see the way in which Satan and these other guys, these other angels, sought to disrupt your plan of redemption, and they sought to contaminate not just the pre-flood world, but also, as a little bit we got there with the post-flood, trying to prevent the Israelites from gaining the land that you promised their dad Abraham. And so help us to continue to wrap our heads around these things, that the world's in a very tough place because of these rebellions. And so, but you have overcome all them, and you were going to redeem us, which is great. And we just praise in Jesus' name. Amen.